Unfortunately, the youngsters themselves couldn't be here, so I will try to represent them. I'm Roel, I work for Cachet. And with Cachet, we bring together youngsters and young adults that have first-hand experiences with youth care, which means bijzondere jeugdzorg, aide à la jeunesse, but also psychological or psychiatric support, or also youngsters with mild mental disabilities. When we meet, we do paintball, we do summer camps, we do improvisational theater, lots of junk food. Not me, because I'm a vegan, and then they call me Flamand, what denotes that I will never really be like them. I will never really share their world and have their experiences. It's all called in this word Flamand. We make rap songs, we make tok-tok movies, slam poetry. We don't do drugs or graffiti, but on behalf of this, we do anything that youngsters do. So in the first place, we want to be a welcoming place for youngsters. And apart from all these activities, we do a lot of talking. We share experiences, and in those experiences, we look for communal good or bad experiences, and to see if there are things that we want to signalize towards youth or mental health care persons or organizations and to politicians. Very often, it's about transition, and that can be transitions from home to care systems, from residential to autonomous living, from care systems to only having support from OCMW, CPS, from support to end up in homelessness, from being a student to be an employee, if you have a backpack and all the exclusion mechanisms that can work on that moment. So in their experiences, transitions are very broad, they're everywhere and are there all the time. But in the frame of today, I focused with two youngsters, Elke and Kimi, more precisely, more closely on transitions within their own care trajectories. Both had fever this morning, so I will read their words for you today. It cannot be the same as when they would do it themselves, but I will do the best I can. Maybe I'm a little bit over-courageous to do so, as it also is to read their Dutch words and immediately try to translate to English. First comes the story of Elke. When I was 16 years old, I went to ambulant mental health service, and there was never really a good connection. I stayed there approximately 1 year in therapy, and that was one in the time that I was in foster care and lived with my aunt. When I was 17 and a half, I went to live alone. And at that moment, I didn't have any therapy, and I didn't want to also, because it was too much school, commuting, building my social relations. I had too much on my mind, too much worries with practical stuff that I didn't want any more support. I had some support on these practical topics until I was 20. Normally, it takes only 1 year and a half, but I asked for an extra year. My individual assistant said also that there were a lot of youngsters that didn't choose for the option to have another year, but then probably many of them ended up in difficulties. During this period where I had the support in autonomous living, there came more need for more support. But I didn't dare to go back to the ambulant mental health service because when I was younger, it didn't help me really. And in the meantime, I became 18, so I also had to pay for it. What I did had was some support from a social work service at school, the CLB. And there I had chats on many topics, more than only about school, but also how I was doing. So there was someone to talk with, but it stayed very superficial. And I also took care of that myself. I didn't want to go deeper at the moment. There was much more going on in my life, but I took care that they would never be alarmed what was really going on. So I presented myself better than I was really doing at the moment. This was a strategy that I learned to survive for many, many years. When I was 8, I was in a talking group, and only when I got 22, there was a psychologist that really reached me, my insight, what was going on inside of me. Before that age, all the targets of the therapy were always fixed by other people than myself. The social worker of the youth court, for example, she obliged the therapy, and what I was thinking and feeling never really mattered. Until I reached the age of 22, I never had the feeling that someone really took time to look for me, what I was going through, and they did their thing. They did their therapy, not knowing my real needs. Now, 4 years later, since 4 years, I have a therapist, again with the ambulant mental health system, and with her it goes very well. Nothing has to. I don't have to talk. She even asked me if I found it necessary that she would ask for my old files. I didn't really like it, so she also didn't do. She's really having a contact only with me. Tomorrow, and this was Monday, so maybe that she's sick is a severe hangover instead of the flu, but anyway. Tomorrow tomorrow I become 26. The young adults team is until 25. But because I started more than 2 years ago, I can still stay there as being an adult, as long as necessary. If you start less than 2 years before your 25th, then you can go also optionally immediately to the adults team. If I would not have been able to stay with the same therapist, I think I would never have started, and probably I would also never started my trauma therapy. This was the first experience of Elke, and I will continue now with Kimi's story. Maybe just a small word of explanation. Kimi was from 6 years onwards in an institution for youngsters with mild mental disability. And then now she starts a story when she's still there at the age of 16, when things got more difficult. I went 3 times to the PAS, the psychiatric ward of the General Hospital. The first 2 times, when I was 16, it was an obligation. It was a condition to be able to stay in the Reitak, what is the name of the institution. When I turned 17, I went for approximately 6 months to the young adults ward in Caritas in Melle. And then after this, I could go back to the Reitak. After the stay in Caritas, I could go twice more to the PAS ward. What was good for me is that from this young adults ward, I could anytime go back to the Reitak. This was a constant in my life. Although they didn't do a lot about my mental health care, what they did was, in Dutch we say, buiten de lijntjes kleuren, so they took some extra space to act on their own behalf. And anytime after I had a difficult period, I could go to psychiatry and back to them. But after all these scares and all this transition, I still don't have the feeling that I'm finished. I still don't have the feeling that I'm prepared for the future. What I am finished with is with care. I'm really fed up with it after so many things. For myself, I don't have any perspective anymore. Luckily, I have my niece, my sister, and my brothers. And now the psychiatrist of the PAS ward gave me some information about euthanasia. He said that he normally never does, but for me, he will make an exception. Any transition was different. Some things were good, some things were very negative. But after any transition, I came home again with a new diagnosis. For me, I cannot indicate one point that was a turning point for me, where one bigger transition took place for me in my life. Whether if it's short or long, anytime it's difficult. Anytime your humor also gets a bit more black and dry, and after a time you're very, very fed up with it. Any transition, the transitions are not only when we go from a ward or an institution to another. Transitions also happen within one stay. For example, every weekend I had to go home. This was also a transition for me. You shouldn't push this. In the young adults ward, every weekend it was obliged to go back to the Reitak. It was meant well, because the argumentation was that we needed to, because then we could keep a sense of being home in our institution. And sometimes indeed it was good. But in the beginning I was not ready for it. In one of those many obliged weekends, I did a suicidal attempt. I ended up in the hospital. Only then the psychiatrist accepted that I could stay a couple of more weeks aligned in the young adults ward. Instead of that, I had to call once a week to the institution. After a couple of weeks, I start again to go back in the weekends to my organization on voluntary base. And then she concludes that good diagnostics is important. Maybe I also have to frame this. She had this label of mild mental disability when she was 6. And now she had a new test, and then there they said that she was in the other category and that she was normal. So she was very angry at the moment that we did the talk. She had the feeling that she has been for years didn't really have the support that she needed just because of this not so well done test or not well contextualized test. So she says good diagnostics is very important. Then you can avoid a lot of unnecessary transitions. After 15 years of VAPH, so the support for people with mental disabilities and other disabilities, it seems that I don't have any mental disability. My IQ is higher than with the first tests. My problems mostly come forth of my mental health care. My mental health that is not so good. So I have the feeling that I had for half of my life not have had the good support. It's a bit sad to end with, but here finishes her talk. This was what she wanted to bring today.